Hello everybody, it's Professor Parish. Welcome to week 11, technically, not counting spring break. So this week we're going to go over drama. We're going to finish talking about drama and our presentations this week. Like I said, we kind of breezed through drama because I want us to get prepped for our research paper and all of that jazz. And plus, we have lots of other classes at SIC if you really want to focus on drama. You can do it. Intro to theater, intro to drama, which is all about plays. You've got lots of options there. So we're going to finish talking about drama today. I'm going to go over an example, paper 3, if you need to see that, and just kind of reiterate and preview some of the things we're going to be doing next week. So I'm going to switch myself over to student view and I'll pop over to our course content so we can see what all is due this week. So for week 11, we are going to go over Shakespearean and American drama and kind of touch base on comedies, things like that. Your discussion forum posts are due by Friday. Your responses to your peers are due by Sunday. The MLA citation presentation, there is an extra copy of it in our resources for week 11, but it is also in week 5, the video is. Please make sure to rewatch the video and reread that presentation because one of your assignments this week is the MLA review. This review, and I'm going to go ahead and click on it, is basically similar to what you did for our midterm at the end of it. And I'll pull it up here. We're going to minimize that for a second. What you're going to do for this MLA review, it's due by Sunday, is what you're given are pieces of information that you would find with a print book. And what I want you to do is underneath each of these, I want you to type out the correct order and formatting for this print book. So you're going to cite how would I cite this print book, The Art of Duck Hunting, in MLA format, given these pieces of information. This one should be pretty easy. Obviously, you need to italicize your titles, so The Art of Duck Hunting should be italicized. If you were handwriting, for example, I use this document both in my online classes and my face-to-face classes. If we were doing this face-to-face in class, I would have you underline if you're handwriting your answers. But guess what? We are not handwriting. We are typing. So you need to make sure that you italicize them. Put them in that slant format. And you can do that by going here and going to the italicize button right there. You also have a news magazine article that's online. There's the information for it. You'll need to put it in the order of MLA. A journal article. This one will probably be the hardest one. But this should go in MLA format, and so should this one. So each of these are worth 5 points. These should be very easy because the answers to all of these are not only in your MLA presentation, they are also in the video lecture that I did in week 5 for this as well. So if you need to go back and review those resources, I would definitely do that. All the answers are pretty much right there in front of you. Just follow the format. If you've got that little insert in your Cengage handbook, it should show you how to do this as well. So this should be a very easy 20 points. But we're starting to get closer to our research paper, which means we are going to be doing a lot more with MLA. So I know week 5 was 5 or 6 weeks ago, so if you need to go back and read or review those resources, please do so this week. We're going to be doing quite a bit with MLA, just to prep you all for that. So this MLA review is due by March 31st. The review document is right here. You can upload here. Going back to our assignments, you have the discussion forum. The posts are due Friday. Responses are due by Sunday. And then the last thing is the outline. So last week we did your thesis for paper 3, and I've read all the theses. They all sound great. Everybody's play will work. Everyone's choice will work. So kudos about that. Now I want to see what your outline is. So I want to see how are you going to structure this paper. And this paper of all of our papers is probably the most traditional. It's probably the most like other papers you've done for other college classes or high school classes. It's a pretty straightforward format. since paper number 2 was so out of the box and kind of out there, this paper is much more traditional. So if you struggled with paper 2, which honestly everybody did a fairly good job on it, but if you struggled with paper 2, this paper will probably be a lot easier to get finished. All right. For the upcoming weeks in this class, next week, week 12, is when your paper is due. So April 7th is when paper 3 will be due, and we'll have a discussion forum then. So that week coming up will be fairly simple. I say that. And then in week 14, or week 13 rather, we are going to dive into research. So we only have a couple weeks left. All right. So definitely focus on these 3 assignments for this week and getting those completed. The forum is the only thing due Friday, and everything else is due Sunday. But that's pretty much it. We, oh, and next week, not just paper 3, but our drama exam is not open, and I'm going to go ahead and open that while I'm in here. Go ahead and kind of show you all the method to the madness. So I'm going to go to edit this assignment, and we are going to open right now and save. Alright, so now that I go back, and I'm going to change back to student view and show you all, but it should show for week 12. It does, yay! So this week you have the MLA review, the outline, and the discussion forum. Next week will be the discussion forum, paper 3, and the drama exam. So the drama exam is open now. So you can work on both week 11 and 12 if you want. Work ahead. But that's pretty much it for this week. So we are going to finish up talking about drama here very shortly. But first I want to show you, this is an example paper from last spring. They chose to write about Death of a Salesman. There are a few grammatical errors. For example, you'll notice they did not italicize the play title. They put it in quotation marks instead. But otherwise, the in-text citations are good. There's not too many grammatical mistakes. I think just the title's the only thing. And I didn't change it because I wanted to keep it how they had it originally. But they go over different terminologies. They go over different concepts with the plays. They talk about the different elements. Kind of break it down like they did their prose paper. And yeah, this is a 5-page paper, so it's good. And then once we get to the end, you'll notice they have a very nice works cited. They cite Death of a Salesman. They cite different versions of it. They cite our textbook. They cite a couple of different books or articles about Death of a Salesman. So they have quite a few sources that they cite in this paper, and they do a really good job on the works cited page. So if you want to see how to do the works cited page, this is a good example. And then their in-text citations are pretty good as well. I will note, like this in-text citation is great. Miller and then the page number. Perfect. This one down here, you don't need that. You just need 82. So it's not a perfect paper, but it is a good example of a nice paper number 3 to kind of look at if you're needing some help formatting or seeing the structure of one. So that's in our resources. And then the last thing we're going to talk about today is the slideshow. The drama chapters. Chapters 26 through 30. So there's quite a few chapters, but not too many terms to go over. Our book talks again about the difference between live theater versus film and versus traditional text. So there is quite a big difference. And one of our discussion forums, either this week or next week, talks about really the difference between live theater versus film. And there is a big difference. The main thing is if you've ever been in a play, once that play starts, you can't stop it. It's not like a film where you can press pause or say cut and then restart the scene. The play has to go on. The show must go on, as the phrase goes. So it's a very different experience as an audience watching, whereas a television show or a film is a completely different experience too. So even shows that are quote-unquote filmed in front of a live audience, that live audience gets to see multiple takes of the show. So it's a different experience than going to a play and seeing that. And actors have different experiences with different types of acting, whether it's film or theater. And one of the videos we'll watch in our discussion forum talks about that. And then text itself. When you read a book, you envision a certain voice and a certain appearance of your characters, so that when you see them on stage or on film, it can be a different experience. I know when the new Great Gatsby movie came out, a lot of my friends were like, I'm not seeing that because Leonardo DiCaprio isn't Jay Gatsby. I honestly didn't care. I love The Great Gatsby, but it's not one of my favorite books. So I was okay with the adaptation, and I actually liked it. It's definitely better than the 1970s version with Robert Redford. I like Robert Redford, but that version of The Great Gatsby, it's awful. We've talked about soliloquies, and especially monologues when we did prose. Soliloquies and monologues are very similar. We talked about this in the last week's lecture. Monologues are moments, soliloquies are scenes. And then we have asides and confidants. An aside is when characters speak in private on stage. Confidant is the secret keeper of the play. We've talked about these here. We've talked about Deus Ex Machina, subplots and odes. Let's get down to... Yep. Oh, so Shakespeare. Shakespearean tragedy. Basically, Shakespeare is most famously known for his plays, even though he was a poet, as we've discussed in the last unit. Shakespeare, I like Shakespeare and I respect him. I respect him for all that he's done in shaping Western literature. Some people get burnt out on Shakespeare, and I totally understand that. Shakespeare has so many different works, and I feel like high schools seem to gravitate towards him and his work because it's so accessible, it's open source, it's not copyright protected, so anybody can use it. It's very accessible to distribute. It is not the most accessible thing to read, and I think that's what language is a constantly evolving thing. We use words now that people 100 years ago didn't use. People didn't use the word selfie or Facebook as a noun or a term. You know, those didn't exist. Whereas, you know, we don't say, thou shalt art, do thou bidding. We don't say those words anymore because our language constantly changes. I think it's the one thing that language is a very subjective matter, whereas math and science is very objective. Math and science, your textbooks don't change too much, especially math. Math books don't change. English is constantly evolving and developing and redoing itself. So Shakespeare has become almost a foreign language in a sense, almost an antiquated, almost like a dead language, because a lot of the words that Shakespeare uses, we don't use. A lot of the inside jokes that Shakespeare has, we don't use, or we don't understand. So it makes it hard to access Shakespearean plays. Now, I do like that there are some versions out there that it'll be a side-by-side comparison. There'll be Shakespeare's original text on one side and a modern English translation on the other. And I actually find that helpful because there are some times when I think that we need that translation to kind of give ourselves a little more familiarity to the product. But anyway, Shakespeare was well known for actually coining a lot of play terminology that we use now. And Shakespeare was heavily influenced by Greek tragedy and Greek theater. That's why a lot of these terms, when we talk about them today, you're going to be like, that sounds like a Greek word or a Greek term. Exactly, because Shakespeare was heavily influenced by Greek mythology in the writing of his own plays. So, stage business. You kind of have to look at the evolution of theater. When theater first became a big thing during Greek times, it was just a small group of people acting out scenes. There was perhaps a chorus of people or a Greek choir that would give off exposition or tell the story, but there were no props, no costume changes, everyone wore big robes, and when they acted in front of a large crowd, they had giant ceramic papier-mâché masks, or giant objects on their head to make them distinct. Because there weren't Megatrons, there weren't videos or giant screens portraying anything. If you were 100 feet away, you just had to hope that you could identify the characters and tell what was happening. Shakespeare created the term of stage business, which is where we have set changes, we have props, we have costume changes. Stage business is all of these things happening on stage and being correlated within the play itself. So he kind of developed the idea of it being a show and being an elaborate production and not just a bunch of people doing a skit on the street corner. Shakespeare created genres of plays. The plays we see that are intrigues or revenge tragedy, Shakespeare developed those. He created those subgenres, which is pretty impressive. Hamlet being one of the most famous revenge tragedies of all time. We've seen it adapted over and over again. If you've seen The Lion King, you've seen Hamlet. If you've watched Sons of Anarchy, you've seen Hamlet. Side note, I drove my parents crazy because I watched a few episodes of Sons of Anarchy. They were all about that show when it was on, and I was like, yeah, this is Hamlet. Yep. Jackson? Yeah, he's Hamlet. His dad dies, his uncle takes over, gets with his mom. All these plot points, it's Hamlet. And my parents were like, be quiet, English woman, English teacher. Get out of here. But it's true. So yeah, I mean, Shakespeare, the subgenres he created have been redone, reconfigured, repackaged over and over again. Intrigue is a mystery, suspense, or thriller, and then revenge tragedy is obviously a tragedy about revenge. Shakespeare drew heavily from Greek mythology, so his play The Tempest draws a lot of mythical elements. You have like the creature, it's very akin to Frankenstein, which actually comes much later on, so we could say Frankenstein's maybe modeled after Greek mythology and The Tempest as well. But there's a lot of ideas that Shakespeare writes about that you would see in Greek mythology. So let's go back to Hamlet. Hamlet is a very huge, larger-than-life character. He's not a god, necessarily, like you would see in a Greek play, but he's very much a Herculean-type figure. He's sort of larger-than-life, very strong, motivated character that we kind of are supposed to look up to for a time. So that leads us to, I'm going to skip blank verse for just a second, the idea of the colossal protagonist, a main character that overshadows all other characters in the story. So, Hamlet is a colossal protagonist. If I told you to name me 5 characters from Hamlet, what are they? Chances are, other than Hamlet, you will probably have a hard time, unless you've really studied Hamlet, naming 5 characters. I mean, there's Claudius, there's Ophelia. If you're not a big Hamlet reader, though, it's kind of hard to shake the fact that Hamlet is, I mean, you've got Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the main character Hamlet himself, because he kind of overshadows a lot of those other characters. And that was kind of Shakespeare's point. The idea of the colossal protagonist is the person we were supposed to really focus on in the story, and they're also the person that deals out the message. So the big tragic things that happen to Hamlet by the end of the play, we're supposed to be really impacted by those. It's sort of like what we see in a lot of Greek tragedies. Oedipus is definitely a colossal protagonist. Other than Antigone, which is kind of the sequel to Oedipus, in the actual play Oedipus itself, I couldn't tell you any main characters unless I looked them up. Just because he's such a big character that overshadows all of the other ones. Now, Antigone, we get to that, and you've got Haman, you've got her sister, you've got her brothers, I mean, you've got all these other characters. Antigone's not a colossal protagonist. She's kind of more like, if we look at modern day Harry Potter, she's more in that vein. Harry Potter is not a colossal protagonist because there's all of these other side characters that we remember as well as Harry Potter. Hamlet, Oedipus, Hercules, these are all characters that Macbeth, these are all characters that really overshadow everybody else in the story, and that's what makes them colossal protagonists. Now, on page 1371 in our book, we have what are called juxtapositions, and I really like this section of the textbook because what it will do is take the play, so like the play Hamlet is in our book, and on page 1371 they start these juxtaposition sections, and they go through different modes of thought or different analyses on the play Hamlet. And I want you all to see this because For example, there are a lot of people in this class that are choosing to write on Antigone, which is awesome because Antigone is a really good play. But I want you to look at these juxtapositions and see there are so many different ways we can look at a play. There is, a psychoanalytical version. There's looking at it through like a feminist version, through a historical perspective, looking at it through a psychological perspective. I mean, there's lots of different ways we can look at it, and each of these juxtapositions on Hamlet show a new way in which readers encounter the play, interpret it, analyze it, and derive meaning from it. So you can definitely do that with Antigone. If you want to look at Antigone as, a feminist piece, yeah, absolutely. Antigone is a woman. She's the main character, and the play's all about her, and this is something from 2,000 years ago. We have a modern sweeping trend of having female heroines everywhere. There's Wonder Woman, there's Captain Marvel, there's, Harley Quinn even though she's more of like an anti-hero. That's nothing new. A lot of Hollywood trends want to make it seem like it's this brand new thing, but look at Antigone. We've been doing it for thousands of years. So you can look at plays through that. And obviously there are differences, and you could point those out, but that would be one way in which you interpret the play and analyze it in a new, fresh manner. So I just wanted you guys to see the different ways that a play can be analyzed so that it gives you ideas of how perhaps you want to look at your own play and your own choices if you want to look at it through a certain lens. I skipped over blank verse, that term. It's just a style that Shakespeare likes to use, unrhymed iambic pentameter. Very specific, right? But meaning that his lines of play writing was not in rhyming form, but it did have a stress oftentimes with that second syllable in the pentameter, which is basically 5 sets of feet throughout. So yeah, there's that term. Just a stylistic choice. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you to write your paper in unrhymed iambic pentameter. That would be a hard choice, right? All right. So we also have in chapter 29 the idea of American drama. So the big push for American drama occurred right around the Great Depression in America. Up until the point of the Great Depression, leading up until the 1920s, most plays, if they were seen, were either, Shakespeare wrote a lot of plays that were about common folk, but the majority of Shakespeare's plays were about the wealthy, about kings and queens, wealthy men and women, and kind of how their greed or selfishness or ambition became their downfall. And so a lot of plays leading up to the Great Depression, in Western culture at least, were focused on the wealthy. Victorian lit, as I've said in the prose section, is probably one of my least favorite genres of literature, only because it's kind of like first world problems, the lit genre. It's like, oh no, we're wealthy Europeans, and we just have so many problems in our mansion. Ugh. I'm like, boring. Give me some sci-fi or some crime dramas, right? But yeah, it's just not my cup of tea. And the issue with the Great Depression once it happened was it wasn't Americans' cup of tea either. It became very hard for Americans who didn't have a job, who had lost most of their money because of the Depression. It was really hard for them to pony up cash to go see a play about rich people's problems. It just wasn't relatable, and it wasn't popular. It didn't reflect where the country was at the time, and it didn't reflect what the audiences wanted to see. They didn't want to escape into a play that was almost patronizing the fact that their situation was the exact opposite of the main characters. So, around the time of the Great Depression and on, there came to be this small Western culture of plays that became known as American dramas. And they focused more on realism, more on the everyday. So the ordinariness and connection to the everyman and every woman that was existing at the time. Because people didn't want to see plays about kings and queens. They wanted to see plays about real people that they could identify with and connect with and understand their struggles. The term chronological realism talks about the play happening in real time. So the play basically happens there's not really a time skip. The play happens as it occurs throughout the actual setting itself. There's not really time skips or flashbacks, things like that. Now, Death of a Salesman has quite a few flashbacks, as does Raisin in the Sun, but both of these plays are excellent examples of American drama because they focus on everyday people suffering through problems and dilemmas that the audiences watching them could relate to. And they are most definitely drama. There definitely is a tragic aspect, especially with Death of a Salesman, to that play, and one that I think still resonates even today. I mean, Raisin in the Sun was written around the time of Civil Rights Movement. That was definitely something that we can relate to today. There's lots of aspects of these plays that we can connect to as audiences, even now, 50, 60 years later. That's kind of what's neat about it, in a way. And then our last chapter is comedy. There's not too much to talk about this. Comedy changes quite rapidly, and I was often told in college that comedy is the hardest thing to get right. If you do comedy well, you will be very rewarded because audiences react extremely well to comedy they connect to. What makes comedy hard is everyone has different senses of humor. Things that I probably laugh about in these reviews, in these lecture videos, things that I find funny, you are probably sitting on the other side of the screen going, oh, there she goes again. And you may not think it's funny at all. And that's just the thing of it. Comedy is a very big gamble because we all have different senses of humor. And if comedy is done poorly, it really falls flat and it can really lose an audience. Typically, things that are sad, you might be like, oh, that's campy, or that's melodramatic, or, yeah, that's a little bit too much. But bad comedy is not good. So, and it changes throughout the years. If you read comedic plays from Greek times and Shakespearean times, there is some crude humor. I mean, really vulgar humor. And it gets away with it because it's written in a language that we often don't quite understand or we can't decipher. So, yeah, you go back and decipher some Shakespearean comedic moments, there is some crude stuff in there that Shakespeare cleverly hides with his wordplay, but when you actually translate it and break it down, making sailors blush. That's all I'm going to say. But there's three main types of comedy that we see in plays. The first is satire. Satire is probably the most highbrow, meaning it's the most clever of the humor. It basically calls out hypocrisy, callousness, stinginess. Think Coen Brothers. Really highbrow, dry humor. So if you've ever seen Fargo, the movie or the TV show, if you've ever seen the movie Burn After Reading, those are all satires. They are very highbrow, making fun of something and pointing out, the comedy of errors with it. Parody is probably the most common, and parody is probably the most accessible of the three terms. Parody is distinctive, it's eccentric, very visceral and surface level comedy, but it has some elevation to it. It has some cleverness to it that we can read between the lines. So, Monty Python, definitely a parody of old medieval type movies, most definitely. The show Twin Peaks, although Twin Peaks is riding that line between satire and parody. If you've ever watched Twin Peaks, it looks very much like a soap opera, but there's so much more to it. It's almost like abstract surreal art. It might be more satire than parody. And then Between Two Ferns. I love Between Two Ferns. It's Zach Galifianakis from The Hangover, the guy with the baby strapped to him. He does a parody of a talk show. And he has real life guests come onto the talk show, and he basically does this terrible job and asks these awful questions that you would never hear on a talk show, but that maybe you'd want to hear on a talk show. And it's great. It's fantastic. You should really watch. If you've not seen Between Two Ferns, you should look it up. It's weird, but it's funny. It's a good parody of the talk show format. And then we have farce. Farce is what we consider the lowbrow, very surface level, very crude. There's not a lot of extra meaning to the humor. It's just all very, what you see is what you get humor. And I would say Family Guy is probably the most common modern example of that. Robot Chicken was on Cartoon Network for a while. My brother watched that, and I watched it too. It's very farcical. Anything that's in that Family Guy realm. I would say that South Park rides the line. If Twin Peaks rides the line between parody and satire, South Park rides the line between farce and parody. Because there's a couple times when South Park gets a little more meta, a little more highbrow, and calls out some more deeper thoughts, but then there's sometimes where it's just fart jokes. So, you know, you got to kind of call it out for what it is. Chase of wit. This term is when characters trade quick remarks back and forth. I always think of the Avengers when Loki and Iron Man are having that conversation at the top of the apartment tower, when Loki's like, we have an army, and Tony Stark's like, we have a Hulk. That little banter back and forth, that's chase of wit. Sherlock and Moriarty going back and forth in Sherlock Holmes, that's chase of wit as well. But yeah, wordplay is verbal humor. It's basically just using like clever phrases, clever kind of like tongue-in-cheek or puns to make a humorous joke or something like that, a play on words perhaps. Puns, I am kind of a sucker for puns, where you use a word through various iterations for humorous effect. So there's this joke that you can't get through the first 10 minutes of Batman Forever, or Batman and Robin rather, without all the ice puns driving you crazy that Arnold Schwarzenegger says as Mr. Freeze. Very true. You can find it on YouTube. It's pretty funny, but there's a lot of puns about ice that Arnold Schwarzenegger's character uses. Stock characters, they are characters people are expected to laugh at. They're just there for humorous effect. You could almost say LeFou in Beauty and the Beast is a stock character. He is the fool. LeFou is literally the fool in French. And that's kind of what his character is established as. It's just meant to be the jester character in that story. And there's a lot of stock characters that kind of have that same, the comedic sidekick, the, you know, wacky villain, things like that. Usually the humorous sidekick is kind of the stock character that most writers go to when they want to add something humorous. And then we have tragicomedy, which is a mixed genre. We often call it black humor or dark humor, where it's something tragic, but it's played off for laughs. That is a very touchy type of humor because some people think it's funny and some people are like, it's not tasteful. It kind of rides that line where you're either going to like it or you're not going to like it. I kind of fall a little bit in the middle. There's some tragicomedy that I find really hilarious, and others I'm like, you went too far. So again, comedy is very hard to accomplish as a writer, as an author or a playwright, because you just don't know how your audience is going to react. It's kind of like if you ever do a comedy or a sketch show, if you've ever done stand-up comedy before, you don't know if the audience is going to like it or not like it. You're just taking a constant gamble. But yeah, that's chapter 30. And overall, that finishes drama. So not a lot of terms with drama. It's a pretty short presentation for 2 weeks. But we won't officially finish drama until next week. So hopefully the terms on here were pretty easy to get through. I think that drama is fairly easy. I think that if you can, once prose and poetry have their own set of terms, but you probably noticed there was a little bit of overlap there. Drama's the same way. There's overlap into poetry, there's overlap into prose. All these genres are kind of starting to overlap, if you've noticed. And when we get to research, that is going to become very apparent. So, if you have any questions about this week, please let me know. If you have any questions about paper 3 as you develop it, please let me know as well. I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. It is registration week, so if you've not registered for summer and fall classes and you would like to do so, if you're a high school student, I will probably be coming to your high school very soon, if I'm not already. If you are not a high school student, but a student out here at SIC, then you are welcome at any time. You can register online, or you can meet with a counselor and register for summer and fall, if you choose to do so. But if you have any questions, please let me know. It's a very busy time of year, but I'm really excited to see your outlines. I'm excited to see the results of this discussion forum this week, and I hope that you're enjoying drama. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you all very soon. Have a great week and a great weekend. See you all later. Bye.